When you hear the name Onassis, what comes to mind? For most of us, it's a name that conjures images of glittering yachts beneath the Mediterranean sun, of unimaginable wealth, and a tragedy of almost ancient Greek proportions. It evokes a world of multi-billion-dollar oil deals, passionate affairs on private islands, and figures whose lives seem to have been written by a Hollywood screenwriter. We see a man who single-handedly built an empire, a widowed first lady seeking sanctuary, and a curse that seemed to cling to their vast fortune across generations. It's a tapestry of power, passion, and pain, a picture so familiar that we rarely stop to consider the extraordinary, almost paradoxical human drama at its heart. We see a wealthy family, but what we're really looking at is a dynasty built on ruthless ambition, only to collapse under the weight of its own making. This is the story of the Onassis family, a name that has become synonymous with the flamboyance of new money, a financial empire built not on aristocratic lineage or generational inheritance, but on sheer cunning, relentless audacity, and a near religious belief in the power of money. Their influence quietly reshaped the global shipping world, rattled the halls of power from Washington to Athens, and created the most sensational headlines of the 20th century. We see lavish parties on the yacht CHRISTINA'S, marriages calculated like business deals, and tragic deaths that have forever etched their name into history. But what if I told you the real story of the Onassis family is not one of a simple linear ascent to greatness? Today we are pulling back the heavy velvet curtain on one of the world's most tragic and deeply misunderstood financial dynasties. This is the story of how a patriarch's fierce ambition forged a path to greatness for his children, and how that path led to a pinnacle of power that was at once a crowning achievement and a gilded, suffocating cage. To understand the world-altering force that the Onassis dynasty would become, you must first transport yourself to a world on the anvil, a world being hammered into a new and unfamiliar shape. Imagine the world into which the family's destiny was forged, the raw, chaotic, and brutal landscape of the early 20th century. This was a Europe crumbling from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, a world of mass migration, of bustling port cities filled with opportunity and danger, and of a new world order being forged in the wake of World War I. The air was thick with the smoke of tobacco from Buenos Aires cafes and the salty tang of the sea from old cargo ships. It was a world that demanded men of iron will, of towering business intellect, and of an almost religious devotion to the idea of escaping anonymity and poverty. It was in this crucible that Aristotle Onassis forged his destiny, and with it, the destiny of his family. He was the dynasty's architect, the stern, unyielding patriarch who drew the blueprints for all that was to come. He was not born into the European aristocracy or the landed gentry. Born in 1906 in Smyrna, a bustling port city of the Ottoman Empire, now Izmir, Turkey, his was a story of pure, unadulterated meritocracy. He was a product of the fierce, resilient Greek community, a young man who had watched his family lose everything in the Greco-Turkish War. But Onassis was possessed by a restless ambition that the devastation of war could not possibly contain. Like so many of his generation, he looked west. With little more than a fierce spirit and an unshakable belief in his own abilities, he migrated to Argentina. Onassis was the quintessential self-made man, cunning, decisive, and at times ruthless. He started in the tobacco business, but his ambition was always aimed at a larger, more consequential stage. He was not a flashy, charismatic politician. He was a businessman, a man who believed in opportunities, in seizing the moment, and in the shipping industry as a vehicle for accumulating vast wealth. His moment arrived during the Great Depression and World War II. When others were selling off ships for pennies on the dollar, Onassis saw an opening. He bought up surplus ships, knowing that when peace returned, they would become money-making machines. It was a profound first-hand lesson in the burdens, the calculations, and the solemn honor of taking a risk. For his children, Alexander and Christina, life was a masterclass in power. Growing up on the legendary yacht Christina O, where Winston Churchill painted and Frank Sinatra sang, they didn't just receive a first-class education. They inherited a worldview. Aristotle taught them that to be an Onassis was to be a master of the universe. He wasn't just raising children, he was forging a legacy. The pressure on them, especially on his favored son Alexander, was immense. Their destiny had been designed before they were even born. And yet, Aristotle's path was not one of unbroken victory. It was paved with the hard lessons of confronting old power. The pinnacle came in 1954 when he signed a Saudi oil transport deal, an agreement that effectively gave him a near monopoly on moving a significant portion of the kingdom's oil. The deal rattled the American oil majors and Western intelligence agencies. They could not abide an independent Greek shipping magnate wielding such immense power over the global oil supply. According to later declassified documents, the CIA orchestrated a covert campaign to sabotage the deal. This defeat taught Onassis a crucial lesson, one he would never forget, that wealth alone was not enough to challenge the established world order. It required something else, something he lacked: social standing and the acceptance of the elite. This realization may well have been the seed of his later relentless pursuit of the ultimate symbol of status, Jacqueline Kennedy. His principles were most fiercely tested and displayed not in the boardroom, but on the deck of the yacht Christina O. The yacht, named after his daughter, Assistant, was not just a vessel. It was a floating palace, a tool of power designed to impress, to charm, and to dominate. With its bar stools made of whale foreskin, its gold-plated faucets, and a swimming pool that could be converted into a dance floor, it was the ultimate symbol of his ostentatious new money style. By inviting the most powerful and famous people in the world, from Churchill to Greta Garbo, on board his yacht, he turned luxury into a kind of social weapon. He was sending a clear signal to his children and to the world that for an Onassis, wealth was not just to be enjoyed, but to be used. This was the DNA of power he was passing down, a reverence for the show of power over its substance. This unshakable integrity made him the perfect man for an impossible marriage when the opportunity arrived. His first marriage to Athena, Tina Livanos, the daughter of a rival shipping titan, was a strategic business move. But after their divorce and after a long, volatile affair with opera diva Maria Callas, Onassis set his sights on a far grander prize. He needed a queen for his empire, someone who could give him the legitimacy and status that money could not buy. He found that in Jacqueline Kennedy, the widowed First Lady of the United States, an icon draped in the trappings of old-world class and tragedy. For his children watching this unfold, this was the ultimate lesson in what it meant to be an Onassis, to be the one man who could get anyone and anything he wanted at any cost. His service was not just a career achievement, it was the forging of the family brand. The second generation of the Onassis family was in its golden age, the era where the patriarch's towering ambitions were realized on a scale that even he, in his most audacious moments, might have found astonishing. But this historic triumph was not the story of a single, solitary man. It was a complex, fascinating interplay of personalities, a veritable family court with its own brilliant but reluctant king, his fiercely ambitious queen, and his children trapped in the Game of Thrones. Together, they would propel the Onassis name to a height of power unique in the story of the 20th century. And at the very center of this constellation was the marriage of Aristotle Onassis and Jacqueline Kennedy. It was a union that stunned the world, a fusion of New World wealth and Old World status, between a cunning Greek tycoon and the grieving icon of Camelot. For Aristotle, it was the culmination of his life's work, the winning of the final prize. He had conquered the world of business. Now, by marrying the most famous woman in the world, he had seemingly conquered society itself. Their wedding in 1968 on his private island, Scorpios, was a global media event. It was seen as the perfect combination of power and glamour. But this was no whirlwind romance. It was a meticulously planned campaign, a strategic siege laid by Onassis over many years. He had first met Jackie and her husband, then Senator John F. Kennedy, years earlier. He was a master at cultivating connections, at planting seeds that might one day bear fruit. The truly pivotal moment came in the summer of 1963. Jackie had just lost her infant son Patrick, a devastating private sorrow. Seeking an escape from her grief, she accepted an invitation from her sister Lee Radziwill, who was then romantically linked to Onassis, to cruise the Aegean on his magnificent yacht, the Christina O. It was on that voyage under the warm Greek sun and far from the prying eyes of Washington that Onassis played his role to perfection. He was the gracious host, the powerful protector, a man of the world who offered comfort and distraction. He was a world away from the rigid protocol of the White House, a woman who only cared about her father's money. The relationship between stepmother and stepdaughter was an icy one, full of suspicion and resentment. Christina and her brother Alexander had a cruel nickname for Jackie, the widow. They saw her as a cold, calculating opportunist who had cast a spell over their father. Christina felt that Jackie had usurped her mother's position, Tina Lavanos, and had stolen her father's affection. Her hostility towards Jackie became a source of constant conflict within the family, poisoning the atmosphere on the island of Scorpios and turning their home into a battleground. The war between them was one of 1,000 small cuts. Christina would deliberately speak Greek in front of Jackie, knowing she couldn't understand, a simple but effective way of marking her territory and making Jackie feel like an outsider. She would complain to her father about Jackie's extravagant spending, feeding his own anxieties about her financial habits. For Christina, who was already struggling with deep-seated insecurities, depression, and eating disorders, the arrival of the most famous and elegant woman in the world as her new stepmother was a devastating blow. She saw in Jackie's effortless grace and global adoration everything she felt she lacked. It was a rivalry fueled by grief, jealousy, and a daughter's desperate desire for her father's undivided attention. Twice during these years of service to his own ambition, when their marriage was at a breaking point, Onassis was said to have initiated divorce proceedings. He felt trapped in a loveless marriage, a business arrangement gone sour. He hired the famous divorce attorney Roy Cohn and began gathering evidence on Jackie's spending habits. But twice, urged on by a sense of public image and perhaps a lingering sense of duty, he reluctantly, painfully backed down. To divorce Jackie Kennedy would be to admit his greatest social conquest was a failure, and for a man like Onassis, admitting failure was unthinkable. The White House that Jackie represented, a position he could never truly achieve, was becoming an inescapable destiny, a gilded cage that was slowly closing around him. While Aristotle was serving as the husband to a global icon, his two children, Alexander and Christina, were struggling to find their place in the family empire. Alexander, the designated heir, was being groomed to take over the business, a role he seemed to accept with a great deal of reluctance. He saw his father's marriage as a monumental distraction, a descent into tabloid fodder that cheapened the family name and took his father's eye off the business. He was more passionate about aviation than shipping, and often clashed with his domineering father over the future of the company. Christina, overshadowed by her brother and neglected by her father, who seemed to only be focused on his new famous wife, struggled with depression and an eating disorder. The family she had known, however flawed, was gone, replaced by a cold and formal arrangement. She was the princess of the court, but a princess held captive in a tower of wealth and loneliness, watching from the battlements as her father paraded his new queen before the world. In 1973, the powerful and perfectly synchronized machine that this family court had built reached its apotheosis of tragedy. The sudden death of Alexander in a private plane crash shattered Aristotle's world. He had lost his son and his heir. The loss was so immense that he never truly recovered. The dream of a long-lasting Onassis dynasty died with his son. His grief created an unbreachable wall between him and Jackie. He retreated into his Greek identity, into his sorrow, leaving her more isolated than ever. For Christina, the only remaining heir, the burden of the empire now fell upon her shoulders. But for the young woman who was already battling her own demons, this victory felt less like a coronation and more like the beginning of a long and difficult sentence. She found herself as the head of an empire she never wanted. She was a queen forced by fate and family to be a king, and the crown from the very first day rested uneasily upon her head. For every great dynasty, for every seemingly unstoppable rise, there is a moment of crisis, a point where the very foundations are tested and the hidden cracks begin to spiderweb their way to the surface. For the Onassis dynasty, that fracture was not a slow, gentle decline, but a sudden, violent, and deeply personal political earthquake. It was a schism that would pit family against family, fate against ambition, and in doing so reveal the profound hidden costs of the power they had so painstakingly acquired. The very forces that had conspired to lift Aristotle Onassis to the pinnacle, his business ruthlessness, his social ambition, and his relationship with his children, would be the very things to tear his world apart. This was not a conflict that erupted overnight. Its seeds were sown in the fundamental differences between Aristotle and his children, differences that their immense wealth and privilege had long masked. Aristotle was a force of nature, a man who saw his empire as a tool to achieve power and status. He believed in using his wealth to shape the world to his will. Alexander, the son and heir, was his polar opposite. He was a sensitive soul, a man who yearned for a life beyond his father's shadow. He loved the freedom of the sky, the thrill of flying, more than the stuffy boardrooms of the business world. While Aristotle saw in his son a successor, Alexander saw in his father a jailer. The relationship between Aristotle and Alexander Onassis was, for years, one of the great and most consequential family relationships in all of modern history. It was a bond of deep love and bitter disappointment, of pride and resentment, of mutual, if sometimes grudging respect. Aristotle believed that in Alexander he had found not just a son, but a political heir who would faithfully and diligently carry on his legacy. He was, as history would prove, tragically and catastrophically mistaken. The two men, for all their years of close family bonds, possessed fundamentally different and ultimately incompatible views of life and purpose. Alexander, was the great champion of a new generation. He was educated at the best schools, spoke multiple languages, and was comfortable in the world of the international jet set. He did not possess the same burning desire to prove himself as his father. He was born wealthy. He did not need to fight for it. This created a deep psychological divide between the two men. Aristotle, the self-made man, could not understand his son's apparent lack of ambition. He saw it as a weakness, a flaw in his character. Alexander, in turn, felt suffocated by his father's constant control and expectations. He wanted to forge his own path, not follow the one that had been laid out for him. Once at the pinnacle of his power, Aristotle, true to his domineering nature, attempted to control his son's life. He did not approve of the woman Alexander loved, Fiona von Thyssen, a woman who was older and divorced. He did everything he could to separate them, seeing her as an unsuitable influence on his heir. This action infuriated Alexander, who saw it as a personal intrusion into his private life, an attack on his own judgment. Furthermore, Aristotle, a believer in the regularity of work, tried to force his son into a role in the family's Olympic Airways company, a role that Alexander found to be boring and unfulfilling. To Alexander, these actions were proof that his father did not respect him as a man, but only saw him as a pawn in his grand game. From his private world, Alexander began to hear a steady stream of whispers, then urgent shouts of discontent. His friends and allies, who now felt abandoned by Aristotle's focus on Jackie Kennedy, sent him a flood of complaints telling him that his father was systematically dismantling his family's happiness for his social ambition. The final unforgivable break came in 1973. On a fateful day in January, the amphibious plane that Alexander was co-piloting crashed shortly after takeoff from the Athens airport. He was gravely injured and died in the hospital the next day. He was 24 years old. To Aristotle, this was more than a personal tragedy. It was the collapse of his entire world. He had lost his only son, the heir to his empire, his future. He was devastated, consumed by grief and a sense of guilt. He believed the crash was no accident. He put up a large reward for any information leading to the arrest of those he believed had murdered his son. He suspected everyone, from business rivals to the CIA. He returned to Greece a changed man, a king without an heir, convinced that his own wealth and power had somehow caused his son's death. The resulting conflict was a political spectacle of Shakespearean proportions, a battle for the soul of the Onassis legacy. In his grief, he estranged himself from Jackie, whom he seemed to blame for his unhappiness. Their marriage, already strained, was now irrevocably broken. The battle for the estate was one of the ugliest and most brutal in family history. When Aristotle died 2 years later in 1975, his will revealed the depth of his bitterness. He left Jackie a relatively small portion of his estate, a fraction of what she could have expected. The majority of his fortune was left to his daughter, Christina, and the other half was used to establish the Alexander S. Onassis Foundation, a philanthropic organization created to honor his lost son. The relationship was irrevocably, publicly, and brutally shattered. The two people who had once been married now were separated by death and resentment. Jackie's ensuing legal battle to win a larger share of the estate became an international tabloid story, a battle between the American widow and the Greek heiress. In the end, Christina settled with Jackie, giving her millions of dollars in exchange for her giving up all claims on the estate. The great family machine the Onassis family had so carefully built over 2 generations now lay in ruins, destroyed by the very tragedy that had been created by its chief architect and most powerful champion. The pain of this betrayal ran incredibly deep on both sides. For Christina, a woman who had always felt overshadowed by her brother and neglected by her father. Alexander's death was a double blow. She not only lost her brother, but also had to face the burden of an empire she was never prepared to lead. In private letters, she lamented the loss of her brother with a profound sadness. She wrote to a relative, "I do not see how I'm going to get through this. It is a nightmare." She called Jackie a widow and a gold digger, but the insults felt defensive, the pained reactions of a woman who couldn't comprehend how their family had so utterly dissolved. For her, the legal battle was a personal tragedy she was forced to endure. Jackie, on the other hand, channeled her sense of betrayal into a righteous, almost holy fury. She saw Aristotle's actions not as a mere difference of opinion, but as a moral failure, a betrayal of his promise to her. The insults she hurled in her legal battle were far more cutting and personal. She argued that Aristotle had not provided for her adequately in their prenuptial agreement. She was on a crusade, and in her mind, Christina was no longer a grieving stepdaughter. She was an enemy in a battle for the fortune who needed to be vanquished. It was a shocking and brutal public spectacle as two powerful women, once family, used their immense platforms to try and destroy one another. The consequences of this shattered relationship echoed for decades. It didn't just tarnish the legacy of Aristotle Onassis, it fundamentally cleaved the family in two, creating a bitter divide between the Greek lineage and the American connection. The old guard conservatives who had backed Aristotle solidified their control over the business empire, pushing it in a more cautious direction. The vibrant, reformist energy that Alexander could have championed was cast out into the political wilderness. It was a cautionary tale written in the language of ambition and betrayal, a stark reminder of how the rupturing of a single powerful family relationship can alter the landscape of a dynasty for generations. The public humiliation of the inheritance battle cast a long and defining shadow over the next generation of the Onassis family. As Aristotle Onassis gratefully and gracefully retreated from the stage of life, his only remaining daughter, Christina Onassis, stepped forward, driven by a fierce desire to reclaim her personal happiness and to achieve the one prize her father had held but never truly valued: true love. If her father was a ruthless businessman, a shark in a gentleman's suit, Christina was a romantic soul trapped in a world of wealth and betrayal. Christina Onassis was, without exaggeration, the intellectual godmother of the poor little rich girl archetype. She was brilliant, deeply principled, and often seen as erratic, aloof, and overly emotional in a way her pragmatic father never was. After a turbulent childhood marked by her parents' divorce and emotional neglect, she inherited one of the largest fortunes in the world at the age of 24. To understand Christina, you have to picture her childhood not as a fairy tale, but as a gilded prison. Imagine a little girl shuttling between her parents' magnificent homes in Paris, Athens, and the south of France, yet feeling profoundly alone in every one of them. Imagine her on the deck of the Christina O, a vessel teeming with the world's most famous and powerful people, yet the one person she truly wanted, a present, loving father, was often just a voice booming from a telephone in his study, closing another multi-million-dollar deal. Her lifelong battle with her weight began in these lonely years, a physical manifestation of a deeper hunger for affection and stability. Her mother, Tina, was a society beauty, effortlessly elegant and slender, a standard Christina felt she could never meet. Food became her only reliable comfort in a world of emotional uncertainty. This struggle would follow her for the rest of her life, a painful public battle that saw her weight fluctuate dramatically, a barometer of her inner turmoil. Her only true ally, her anchor, in the emotional storm of her family was her older brother Alexander. He was her protector, the one person who understood the suffocating pressures of their name. When he was torn from her life in that fiery plane crash, it wasn't just a dynastic blow. It was the loss of her emotional core, leaving her utterly adrift in a world she already found menacing. So when her father died just 2 years later, Christina, at just 24 years old, did not just inherit a fortune. She inherited the ruins of a broken kingdom, and she was its solitary queen. She quickly established herself as a shrewd businesswoman, a tough negotiator who commanded the respect of a male-dominated business world. The old guard of her father's empire, the skeptical Greek shipping magnates, initially dismissed her as a flighty, emotional girl. They were in for a shock. Christina stepped into the boardroom in Monte Carlo, and with a will of iron and an intellect that had been sharpened by a lifetime of observation, she took command. She worked tirelessly, poring over contracts, mastering the complex logistics of the oil tanker fleet, and proving to be a fierce opponent of waste and mismanagement in her father's empire. It was she who stabilized the business after the chaos of her father's final grief-stricken years. Her colleagues, in a mixture of awe and respect for her commanding business prowess and her unwavering dedication, nicknamed her the Greek Queen. For millions of people across the country, she was not just an heiress. She was their heart, their soul, and their brain. She had proven she could run the empire. The tragedy was that she could master a fleet of supertankers, but she could never seem to navigate the treacherous waters of her own heart. Her entire life's ambition, the singular goal towards which all her efforts were directed, was to win a happy personal life. She sought love 4 separate times, and each time she was denied in a heartbreaking, almost cruel fashion. Each marriage was a desperate gamble, a new attempt to fill the void that her wealth could never touch. Her first act of romantic rebellion came in 1971, at the age of 20, when she eloped with Joseph Boker. He was everything her father despised, a 48-year-old divorced American real estate developer with 4 children. For Christina, he was likely a father figure, a man far removed from the suffocating world of Greek shipping dynasties. It was a desperate cry for a different kind of life. Aristotle was enraged. He saw Boker as nothing more than a fortune hunter and used his immense power to crush the union. He reportedly cut Christina off financially, and the pressure was too much to bear. The marriage, her first grasp at an independent life, was over in just 9 months. Her second attempt in 1975 was the complete opposite. It was an act of conformity. Shortly after her father's death, she married Alexander Andreadis, the heir to another major Greek shipping fortune. On paper, it was the perfect dynastic merger, a union that would have made her father proud. The wedding was a lavish affair, a spectacle of Greek society. But the reality was a hollow, loveless arrangement. Andreadis was a notorious playboy, and the marriage was little more than a facade. Its collapse after just 14 months taught Christina a painful lesson. Even doing the right thing, following the dynastic playbook, could not guarantee happiness. It only deepened her cynicism and her loneliness. Her third marriage in 1978 was perhaps her most desperate and shocking gamble. She married Sergei Kauzov, a mid-level Soviet shipping official with a wife and child back in Moscow. At the height of the Cold War, the heiress to a great capitalist fortune marrying a communist bureaucrat was a global scandal. The press went into a frenzy. Was she a spy? Was he? The truth was likely far simpler and far sadder. Christina was so starved for affection, so desperate to find someone outside her circle of suitors, that she fell for a man who offered her a different kind of attention. She followed him to Moscow, trading her Parisian penthouse for a grim state-owned apartment. It was an act of profound romantic delusion. The culture shock, the political pressure, and the fundamental incompatibility of their worlds doomed the marriage from the start. It dissolved as quickly as it had begun, leaving Christina more isolated and heartbroken than ever. But her most agonizing and final defeat came in her fourth marriage to French businessman Thierry Roussel. By then she was the undisputed heavyweight champion of hopeless romance. In Roussel, a handsome, charming playboy from a good family, she thought she had finally found her match. He swept her off her feet, and for a time she was ecstatically happy. In 1985, their daughter, Athena, was born. Christina was overjoyed. She finally had the one thing she had craved her entire life, a family of her own. She had the loyalty of her own heart, and the love seemed, at long last, to be within her grasp. But the husband she so adored was a serial cheater. He had been having a long-running affair with a Swedish model, Gabby Landhage, a secret life that ran parallel to his marriage to Christina. The betrayal was absolute and cruel. Landhage became pregnant at the same time as Christina and gave birth to a son just months after Athena was born. When Christina discovered the affair, she was devastated, but her desperation to hold on to the dream of her family was so profound that it led to one of the most bizarre and tragic chapters of her life. In a desperate attempt to hold on to her husband, Christina was said to have offered to adopt the child. She was willing to accept any humiliation to rewrite the rules of love and marriage if it meant she wouldn't be alone again. But Roussel refused. He wanted both. He wanted the comfort and security of his marriage to the richest woman in the world, and the passion of his relationship with his mistress. The battle for Christina's happiness was a bitter, no-holds-barred struggle for the soul of her own life. Roussel had the charm and good looks, but Christina had the deep-seated loyalty of her heart. The divorce was a brutal public affair. In the divorce courts, after a series of brutal floor fights over the custody of their daughter, Athena, the forces of Christina, with their superior media and political operation, narrowly triumphed. Christina Onassis, the Greek queen, the woman who had dedicated her entire life to the cause of romance and the pursuit of love, had been denied her dream for the last time. In a gesture of supreme resignation, she graciously conceded and focused on raising her daughter, but the dream was dead. The light inside her seemed to go out. She would be diagnosed with a rapidly spreading depression shortly after and would die just a year later in 1988, found in a bathtub in Buenos Aires, her heart having finally given out at the age of 37. It was a profound and deeply felt generational tragedy. The daughter who desperately wanted love could never get it, while the father, who had never wanted it in the first place, had it thrust upon him, only to see it end in disaster. The Onassis dynasty, it seemed, was destined to be denied the one prize it now truly, desperately coveted. Christina's romanticism was not a matter of personal convenience. It was a deeply ingrained philosophy, a direct inheritance of her father's view of the world as something that could be bought, but stripped of the elder Onassis's pragmatism. She saw betrayal not just as a bad set of actions, but as a fundamental, almost sacrilegious assault on the principles of love and fidelity. Where others saw pragmatic relationships, Christina saw a creeping bureaucratic opportunism that threatened to smother the nation's romantic spirit. Her opposition was emotional, consistent, and absolute. This same rigid adherence to principle led her to take deeply unpopular stances, even when it hurt her financially. After her divorce from Roussel, she gave him a generous financial settlement. It was not because she had any sympathy for him, far from it. Rather, as a romantic, she was horrified by the concept of using money to punish. To her, it was a violation of the most basic principles of love. Much of the world, still reeling from the tabloid horrors of her divorce, saw her position as a bizarre and offensive legal quibble. But for Christina Onassis, principle was principle, and love was love, even for the most monstrous of men. It was this very quality, her emotional honesty and her refusal to bend to popular opinion, that made her followers revere her, and her opponents see her as a cold, unfeeling ideologue. In the end, what makes the story of Christina Onassis so compelling is the profound sense of what might have been. Unlike her father, who was content in the world of business, Christina was a woman born for the emotional arena. In private, the cold public image melted away. She was known to be a devoted mother, a woman with a dry wit and a deep, if rarely shown, personal warmth. Her relationship with her daughter Athena was one of incredible devotion. She personally shielded her from the media and tended to her needs with a gentleness that would have shocked her business adversaries. She was a woman of immense integrity and profound conviction. Had she won in her pursuit of love, the entire trajectory of her life and the legacy of the Onassis dynasty would have been different. The activist, grassroots romanticism that would later find its champion in romantic novels might have come to power a decade earlier. Her repeated failures to grasp the ultimate prize represent more than just a personal tragedy. They mark a crucial turning point in the history of a dynasty, the last stand of an older, more constitutional romanticism before the rise of the media-driven, personality-focused relationships that would define the rest of the 20th century. But while Christina's story was one of tragic, unfulfilled ambition, the family's story had a final, remarkable, and deeply redemptive third act. After the crushing and humiliating public battles, the Onassis dynasty did not fade into bitter obscurity or spend its remaining years nursing its political wounds. Instead, it did something remarkable. It appeared to be the most peaceful dynasty in the world. The last heir, Athena Onassis, Christina's daughter, gracefully and gratefully retreated from the political family stage, where she became a symbol of survival. She had returned to her first and truest love, horses. She was finally free from the relentless burdens of public life, free from her mother's driving ambition, and free from the long, imposing shadow of her grandfather. She was, by all accounts, deeply and profoundly private. To understand the depth of Athena's escape, you must first understand the nature of her prison. She was born not into a cradle, but into a battlefield disguised as a nursery. When her mother Christina died when Athena was just 3 years old, she did not inherit a fortune. She inherited a war. On one side was her French father, Thierry Roussel, the man who had so publicly betrayed her mother. On the other was a formidable council of 4 Greek trustees, the powerful stern-faced men her grandfather had appointed to guard the family empire. These men, whom the press would later call the Greybeards, saw themselves as the sacred protectors of the Onassis legacy. They viewed Roussel not as a grieving father, but as a gold-digging opportunist, the final in a long line of suitors who had preyed upon the Onassis women. And so, Athena's childhood became a relentless, decade-long tug-of-war for her soul, and more pointedly, for control of her billion-dollar inheritance. She was raised in a secluded villa in Switzerland, a world away from the sun-drenched shores of Scorpios and the bustling streets of Athens. Her father raised her alongside his new family, his former mistress, and their children. It was a life of immense material comfort, but one of profound emotional complexity. She was a living symbol of her mother's heartbreak, being raised by the very man who had caused it. The Greek trustees, meanwhile, waged their war from afar. They fought Roussel in court over every expenditure, from school fees to security costs, creating a constant atmosphere of suspicion and conflict. They insisted she be raised with an appreciation for her Greek heritage, for the Orthodox faith, for the language of her ancestors. Roussel in turn accused them of trying to turn his daughter against him, of seeing her as a Greek national treasure rather than a little girl who needed her father. Athena was caught in the middle, a pawn in a bitter game between the father she knew and a legacy she could not possibly comprehend. The money itself was not a gift. It was a monstrous living entity that defined her existence. She was not a child. She was the richest little girl in the world. Every milestone of her life was marked not by private celebration, but by public speculation. When she turned 18, the world held its breath. This was the moment she would finally come into her inheritance, the moment she would gain control of a fortune estimated to be anywhere from $1 to $3 billion. But freedom did not come easily. The coming of age of Athena Onassis was not marked by a lavish party, but by the filing of a lawsuit. In a move that shocked the world, she took her own father to court, accusing him of mismanaging her funds and demanding he be removed as her financial guardian. It was a brutal public severing of ties, a daughter forced to legally battle her own father to claim what was hers. She won, but the victory was a hollow one. She had her fortune, but the emotional cost was immeasurable. She had learned a lesson that had defined her family for generations, that where there is Onassis money, there is betrayal, even from those who are supposed to love you most. It was against this backdrop of sorrow and suspicion that she sought refuge, and she found it in a place far from the boardrooms and courtrooms that had defined her life: the stables. In the world of equestrian show jumping, Athena found something that had always eluded her, a sense of genuine, unadulterated merit. A horse does not know the name Onassis. It does not care about Swiss bank accounts or Greek shipping fleets. A horse responds to skill, to patience, to trust, and to a quiet, unspoken connection. In the saddle, she was not an heiress, she was a rider. Her success or failure was measured not by her inheritance, but by her own hard work and talent. The stables became her sanctuary, the one place on earth where she could simply be Athena. Then, in 2005, the dream she had cherished since she was a young woman, the dream she had twice sacrificed for a public career she never truly desired, finally came true. She married Álvaro Doda de Miranda Neto, a Brazilian Olympic show jumper. In a move widely praised across the media, she had found a life partner who shared her passion. He was a man from her world, a world of discipline, competition, and a deep love for these magnificent animals. Their wedding in São Paulo was a grand affair, but it was also a deeply personal one. For Athena Onassis, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated, almost transcendent joy. She had finally achieved the one job she had always believed she was born to do, to be a wife and a professional equestrian. The truth is, she was said to have written to a close friend shortly after her marriage, that in my present life, I don't remember that I ever was an Onassis. In her mind, her years as an heir were merely a long, unpleasant detour on the road to her true destination. She threw herself into the role of wife and athlete with a passion, an energy, and a sense of purpose she had never consistently displayed in her public life. She and Doda became a formidable team, competing at the highest levels of the sport around the world. She proved to be a brilliant and surprisingly effective competitor, representing Greece in international competitions, a quiet nod to the heritage she had once been accused of abandoning. Her greatest and most lasting contribution was not in the world of business, but in the world of equestrian sports. She streamlined her life, brought a new sense of collegiality and efficiency to her internal operations, and, most importantly, she successfully lobbied for a private life for herself, transforming her from a public figure who was obligated to appear in tabloids into the modern, powerful individual she is today, one who selects events of major national importance. She also spearheaded the effort to build a life outside of her family's name, giving herself a true home and a symbol of her status as an independent individual. As an individual, she was an introvert, a believer in privacy and self-reliance, but her true gift was as a consensus builder, beloved by her colleagues in the equestrian world, from the arch-conservatives to the great liberal dissenters, for her warmth, her generosity of spirit, and her good humor. For a time it seemed the curse had finally been broken. She had found a partner who loved her for herself, who shared her world, who understood her passion. The tragic, lonely heiress had seemingly found her fairy tale ending. She served in this role for over a decade, a period she later described as the happiest of her life, until her marriage ended in divorce in 2016. The fairy tale shattered in the most brutal and public way imaginable. The serpent of infidelity, the same one that had poisoned her mother's life, had entered her own garden. Athena reportedly discovered that Doda had been having a long-term affair, a betrayal that was not just personal, but a cruel, haunting echo of her mother's own heartbreak with Thierry Roussel. The curse, it seemed, had not been broken. It had simply been dormant. The divorce was not a quiet parting of ways. It was another declaration of war over the Onassis fortune. Doda, despite having signed a prenuptial agreement, launched a legal battle for a significant portion of her wealth, demanding millions in alimony and access to their shared assets. The world watched as the private pain of the last Onassis was once again dragged through the courts, her life picked apart by lawyers and dissected by the tabloid press. It was a stark, painful reminder of the lesson she had learned as a child, that the money would always be there, a third party in every relationship, a source of endless conflict and suspicion. But this is where the story of Athena diverges from the tragic path of her mother. While Christina had crumbled under the weight of betrayal, Athena endured. She fought the legal battle with a quiet, steely resolve. She won. And then she did something that was both profoundly symbolic and deeply personal. She began to dismantle the empire. She sold Scorpios, the private island that had been the glittering symbol of her grandfather's power and the stage for so much of her family's drama. It was an act of liberation, a final severing of ties with a past that had brought her so much pain. She remains the only heir to one of the most famous families in the world. But the true triumphant story of Athena Onassis is the story of a woman who found her greatest success, her deepest happiness, and her most lasting legacy not in the awesome power of wealth, but in the quiet, ordered majesty of a private life. She had won the world, but it was only in renouncing that world that she truly found herself and fulfilled her own destiny. She did not break the curse by finding a perfect love, but by learning to live without one, by finding her own strength, her own purpose in the saddle of a horse under an open sky. It was the family's greatest and most personal triumph. Looking back across the long sweep of the decades, the story of the Onassis dynasty emerges as a powerful, poignant, and deeply human reminder that no empire, political or otherwise, is built without a cost, and that no legacy is a simple, uncomplicated inheritance. It is not a linear story of inexorable progress, but a dramatic saga of duty clashing with desire, of public ambition and private sorrow, and of the immense, often crushing weight of a family name that became synonymous with both triumph and tragedy. Aristotle Onassis was the architect, a stern man of the Gilded Age, who built a formidable foundation of principle, intellect, and ambition. He dreamed of a dynasty that would conquer the world, and he realized that dream on a scale that was and remains almost unbelievable. He was a unique, singular figure in business history, a man who reached the absolute pinnacle of both financial and social power. He was a reluctant king who found his personal life to be a purgatory, but he was also a brilliant and joyful businessman who found his life's purpose and happiness in the hallowed halls of the boardroom. His personal story is a profound meditation on the nature of success, forcing us to question our own definitions of fulfillment. He gave the world decades of honorable, competent service, a legacy of quiet administrative achievement, and a lasting structural impact on its legal system. But that same shining legacy is inextricably, tragically linked to the bitter family fracture, a feud born of a shattered family that tore a great dynasty apart and fundamentally altered the course of the 20th century. The story of his daughter, Christina Onassis, is one of the great what-ifs of modern history, a Shakespearean tragedy of the Greek queen, a woman of immense intellect and unwavering principle who saw her life's singular ambition repeatedly, cruelly thwarted. The dynasty that followed was one of honorable echoes, of dutiful service in a lower key, a long and graceful fade that ended not with a bang, but with the quiet public shame of a minor scandal. The Onassis family's story forces us to confront uncomfortable and enduring questions about the nature of public life in a democracy. What is the true price of ambition, both for those who possess it and for those who do not? Is it nobler to dutifully accept a crown you do not want, or to relentlessly pursue the calling that lies deep in your own heart? And what happens to a great and powerful dynasty when the ferocious fire of that initial world-conquering ambition finally, inevitably, burns itself out, leaving only the warm embers of a famous name? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Onassis dynasty. It's a story that reminds us that in the grand ledger of history, the greatest titles and the highest offices are often just the public face of a much more complicated, much more conflicted, and much more human story. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that look behind the legends. We'll see you next time.